At 3:19 a.m., the dark sky over Sudan turned into a battlefield. In less than 10 seconds, a Russian Il-76 military transport, massive, glowing on radar like a beacon, was ripped apart by a missile that should never have been fired. Two streaks of light crossed the sky, launched not by Western forces, not by rival jets, but by a Chinese-made defence system operated by Sudan's own rapid support forces. What followed was a chain of fire and shock that reached far beyond Africa's deserts, straight to Moscow and Beijing. It began quietly long before the explosion. The Russian Il-76, tail number RA78781, crossed into Sudanese airspace under the cover of night. No civilian transponder, no international flight clearance. It was flying low, below 12,000 feet, too low for commercial routes, too high for comfort. Inside the cockpit, the crew followed a tight flight plan from the eastern border, cutting directly toward Wadi Sedna Air Base, one of the Sudanese armed forces' last major strongholds near Khartoum. On board were 21 souls, 14 Russian servicemen and 7 Sudanese officers. Their mission was secret. Their cargo, even more so, the Il-76, wasn't a passenger aircraft. It was a military workhorse designed to carry over 50 tons of equipment, drones, weapons, radar modules, anything needed to keep a front line alive. That night, its cargo bay was filled with metal crates, sealed electronics, and power units believed to support a new drone command centre in Al-Shajara. For the Sudanese military, this flight meant survival. For their enemies, it was a clear signal that Russia had entered the war. Around 3:05 a.m., 12 miles west of Khartoum, a secret RSF radar post came alive. The faint signal appeared first as a flicker, then solid. A trained operator locked onto it instantly. The system identified a Russian navigation radar frequency, one unique to the Il-76's PS-90 avionics system. Within seconds, the report reached RSF command. The order was clear: verify, track, and if confirmed, neutralise. In an underground bunker near El Jebaline, under dim green light and thick heat, RSF commanders huddled over their screens. The flight path was unmistakable. The Russian plane was descending toward a base under Sudanese government control. If it landed, it would deliver advanced combat UAV systems, enough to shift the war overnight. Intelligence suggested the Russians were setting up a drone hub to give the Sudanese military full aerial dominance over RSF-controlled regions. Time was slipping away. The Il-76 was less than 20 miles from landing. The decision came fast: activate the FK-2000, a Chinese-built short-range air defence system the RSF had secretly acquired through Libya. It was a weapon meant for defence, not for taking down heavy cargo planes. But this was no ordinary war. Orders were final. Confirmed target. Fire on sight. At 3:17 a.m, the FK-2000 radar locked on. The operators displayed pulsed red target range 21.4 kilometres, speed 465 miles per hour. The plane was moving slow enough to be caught, big enough to be hit. In the dark desert night, the system's hydraulics whirred as the twin missile tubes tilted upward. Seconds later, the encrypted command flashed on the screen: weapon unlock. Fire. The first missile launched, leaving a trail of white flame. Then a second. Each streaked across the sky at over Mach 3, guided by radar and locked onto the Il-76's glowing engines. Inside the cockpit, alarms screamed. The crew barely had time to react. The pilot pulled hard on the controls, forcing the giant transport into a shallow dive. But the Il-76 wasn't built for evasion. It was a flying fortress, not a fighter jet. The first missile hit the right wing, tearing through engine number 3. Fire exploded across the sky. The second missile struck seconds later, detonating beneath the fuselage. The force ripped open the cargo bay, igniting batteries and fuel. The aircraft became a torch in the night sky, its tail spinning, engines fading, every warning light on the console burning red before fading to black. From the ground, RSF spotters watched through infrared scopes. The massive heat signature flared, then began falling fast. The Il-76 spun downward, flames streaming behind it like a comet. Moments later, a blinding orange flash lit up the horizon. The ground shook. A column of smoke climbed nearly 1,000 feet into the sky. The red dot on the FK-2000 radar vanished. 2 words appeared on the console. Target neutralized. Silence filled the bunker. No one spoke. Everyone knew what that meant. The Russian plane, its crew, its cargo, all gone. The mission was complete, but the consequences were only beginning. By the time the dust settled, the flames of the downed Il-76 were visible for miles. In the still darkness, the desert around Al-Salam glowed faintly orange. The Rapid Support Forces' quick reaction teams moved fast, speeding through the rough terrain in armoured pickups. Headlights off, guided only by night vision scopes and infrared beacons. Their orders were simple but urgent: reach the crash site before the Sudanese army could. Every minute mattered. The aircraft had fallen less than 9 miles from Wadi Sedna Air Base. Deep inside government-controlled airspace, the wreckage could contain intelligence, weapons, or proof of foreign involvement. For the RSF, it was more than a victory, it was an opportunity to expose the truth. When the first team arrived, the air still smelled of burning metal and aviation fuel. The Il-76 had hit the ground at over 330 miles per hour, carving a trench more than 600 feet long and 10 feet deep. The heat had twisted the aluminum hull into liquid shapes, welding sand and steel together. There was no fuselage left, no intact wing, only scattered fragments glowing under the moonlight. One of the engines, the third from the right, had been blown free and lay hundreds of feet from the crater, half buried, still hissing with residual heat. The cockpit was completely destroyed. Even the flight data recorder was melted beyond recognition. The RSF soldiers moved cautiously through the debris, their boots crunching on shards of metal and glass. Among the wreckage, they found what they were looking for: the cargo. Shattered containers marked with Russian lettering, burnt circuit boards, lithium battery packs, and drone components, the unmistakable signature of Moscow's military technology. A partially melted All-in-10 control unit was recovered first, followed by pieces of communication terminals labelled Inmarsat. Nearby, several heavy crates bore warning symbols: temperature-sensitive electronics and explosive materials. These were not humanitarian supplies, they were battlefield equipment meant for drone warfare. The discovery confirmed what RSF intelligence had suspected. The Russians were not just supporting the Sudanese government, they were equipping them for a long-range drone campaign that could change the entire war. By 4 a.m, command confirmed all 21 people on board were dead, 14 Russians and 7 Sudanese officers. Identification tags, some scorched but readable, matched personnel from Russia's airborne special operations units and Sudan's electronic warfare brigade. The revelation sent shockwaves through the RSF leadership. Moscow's involvement was no longer rumour. It was written in debris and blood across the desert floor. Within hours, encrypted satellite messages carried the coordinates, images and recovered evidence back to RSF headquarters. In the following days, Western media began to pick up the story. The headline was impossible to ignore: Chinese missile downs Russian plane in Sudan. Analysts called it a geopolitical earthquake. The weapon used, the FK-2000, was Chinese-made, the aircraft destroyed, Russian-built. And the operators, Sudanese rebels who had turned a Chinese defence system into their own sword. In one explosion, Sudan's civil war had exposed a rare and awkward truth. 2 of the world's most powerful allies had indirectly collided on the same battlefield. Inside Russia's defence ministry, silence dominated the corridors. The Il-76 that went down was not just any plane. It was one of the newest Il-76MD-9A variants. Barely 6 weeks old, handed to Sudan under a technical support contract. It had logged less than 130 hours of flight time. Losing it was a humiliation that Moscow couldn't easily explain. Officially, no statement came. Unofficially, Russian sources blamed a navigation malfunction. But satellite images told a different story: a fiery impact crater, fragments consistent with missile detonation, and unmistakable traces of Chinese-made tungsten fragments scattered around the site. In Beijing, the response was equally quiet, but deeply uneasy. The FK-2000, designed for low-altitude air defence, had never before been seen in action outside controlled trials. Now its first confirmed kill was a Russian aircraft. The symbolism was heavy. Chinese officials quickly clarified that the system had been illegally obtained through third-party channels. But the world had already seen the footage, the FK-2000 radar console glowing red, the launch sequence visible in leaked clips from RSF operators. The irony was impossible to ignore. Russia and China, two nations proclaiming partnership against Western dominance, had just turned their weapons on each other by proxy. In Sudan's skyback, on the ground, the RSF celebrated the strike as a turning point. In their view, they had brought down a flying fortress proof that even the most advanced powers could bleed. The destruction of the Il-76 did more than cripple the Sudanese army's low. In the days that followed the fall of the Russian Il-76, Sudan did not sleep. Across Khartoum, people whispered about the explosion that shook their windows at 3 in the morning, about the orange light that tore the sky open and vanished just as suddenly. Official channels called it an aerial accident, but the streets already knew the truth. Something powerful had been shot down. The Rapid Support Forces, now confident in their victory, released fragments of information through encrypted channels, thermal images, wreckage coordinates, and intercepted radio chatter from Sudanese army frequencies. They wanted the world to see what they had done. It was not just a battlefield triumph. It was a declaration that no foreign aircraft, no matter whose flag it carried, could enter Sudan's skies without risk. Inside the RSF headquarters south of El Jebelain, the mood was grim and electric. Commanders gathered in a low concrete room that still smelled of oil and sweat, studying satellite updates on a flickering screen. The message from their intelligence wing was clear. The Sudanese army was in chaos. The destruction of the Il-76 had cut off a vital supply artery. No reinforcements, no ammunition, no spare parts. Units around Kosti and El Obeid were stranded, running on dwindling fuel and broken morale. The RSF had effectively carved a no-fly zone across southern Sudan, using just one Chinese-made missile system and an improvised radar network. The victory was strategic, but it came with consequences that few had imagined. By the end of that week, Russian military channels began to pulse with hidden anger. Analysts at Aviastar, the plant where the Il-76MD-9A was built, confirmed the aircraft RA-78781 had been part of a limited production batch, a plane meant to demonstrate Russian capability in overseas logistics. Losing it to a Chinese missile was more than a failure. It was an embarrassment on the global stage. Moscow faced a dilemma: to admit the loss and expose their secret operations in Sudan, or to stay silent and let speculation spread. They chose silence. No statement was released. No condolences were offered. The Russian embassy in Port Sudan remained dark, guarded by local soldiers who refused to answer questions. Yet the evidence was impossible to hide. Fragments of the fuselage carried Cyrillic markings. Data chips bore Russian serial numbers, and uniforms recovered from the wreck were unmistakably military issue. In Beijing, the reaction was colder, but no less serious. The FK-2000 had never been intended for export beyond select government clients. It was a prototype hybrid system combining radar, cannons and short-range missiles into one mobile platform. Now it had been used in a real war operated by a militia and had destroyed an aircraft from a supposed ally. Chinese diplomats rushed to distance themselves, claiming the system had been diverted from Libya and not supplied by state channels. But the story had already escaped their control. International media branded it the first proxy fire between Russia and China. The headlines spread faster than any official denial could catch up. Meanwhile, the RSF used the victory for propaganda. Their spokesman released statements filled with calculated defiance. "We will not accept a sky that is occupied. We will not kneel before foreign weapons." For the first time, global powers took them seriously. Western intelligence agencies began to track their movements more closely, studying the FK-2000's performance and analysing the recovered telemetry data. The strike had proven one thing, that the RSF was not fighting with borrowed strength. They had mastered modern warfare. But inside the movement, some leaders saw danger in their success. They knew what might follow. Russia could retaliate through proxies. The Sudanese army might receive new air support or advanced drones from foreign allies desperate to restore balance. Each victory came with the risk of escalation, and Sudan was already burning. The FK-2000 battery that had fired the fatal missiles was quickly relocated, hidden in the arid hills north of El Gezira under layers of camouflage netting. Operators were ordered to power down all radars and maintain radio silence. Their success had made them targets in Moscow. Military planners met behind closed doors. Satellite imagery confirmed the wreckage, and fragments of missile casings matched Chinese metallurgy. Privately, senior officers admitted what public statements never would. The Il-76 had been carrying drone control systems meant to establish a long-range strike capability in central Sudan. Now, those systems were gone, destroyed, or